At the 2019 Heartland County Fair, fertilizer salesman Mitch Dawson pointed from the grandstand at farmer Sam Riggs and told a crowd of 300, "That man is betting your dinner on dirt and worm poop." The laughter was loud and cruel. 3 years later, Riggs's soil would hold 20,000 more gallons of water per acre. His corn would stand 2 feet taller than Dawson's best clients, and that same salesman would be silently writing his resignation letter. Sam Riggs was betting everything on compost and microbes instead of the blue chemical bags that fed every other farm for 50 miles. To the old guard, he was a fool risking bankruptcy. To a new generation, he was a heretic challenging a billion-dollar gospel. The question wasn't who would laugh last, but whether a man could really feed the world using little more than what he once threw away. But Riggs's rebellion didn't start at that fair. It started 6 months earlier, in a silent farmhouse kitchen, with a bill for $84,000 and soil so dead it turned to dust in his hand. The bill was from Acre Mitch Dawson's company. It itemized 42 tons of synthetic nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus spread across Riggs's 800 acres the previous spring. Payment due in full. Sam stared at the number, then at the soil sample bag on his counter, sent to a lab at his wife's insistence. The results were a single paragraph. Severe organic matter depletion, microbial activity virtually absent. Recommend immediate remediation or expect significant yield decline. His father, Henry Riggs, had bought this land in 1972. 400 acres then expanded over decades. Henry swore by the new post-war chemistry. He called synthetic fertilizer magic dust. It made things grow faster than anyone thought possible. Yield per acre doubled, then tripled. The Acre salesman was a hero back then, driving a shiny truck right to your field. Henry never questioned it. He signed the annual fertilizer contract like it was a membership to a secret club that guaranteed prosperity. Sam took over in 2000. He ran it the same way. More acres, bigger equipment, higher yields, more fertilizer. The bills got bigger, but the margins got thinner. A bad year could wipe out 3 good ones. He blamed markets weather, bad luck. He never blamed the blue bags. Until that lab report. The soil wasn't just tired, it was dead. It had no structure. When it rained, it sealed over like concrete. When it was dry, it blew away. The magic dust had fed the plant but starved everything else. For 50 years, the Riggs farm had been treating symptoms, not the disease, and the disease was the dependency itself. Sam called an old college friend, Leo Chen, who worked in sustainable ag research at the state university. He read Sam the lab results over the phone and was quiet for a long time. "Sam," he finally said, "your soil is bankrupt. You've been withdrawing from the biological bank for decades and never making a deposit. The account is empty. The next crop failure isn't a risk, it's a mathematical certainty." Leo emailed him studies, pages of them. One showed that each 1% increase in soil organic matter helps soil hold 20,000 more gallons of water per acre. Sam's organic matter was below 1%. Another showed regenerative practices could boost microbial biomass by over 130%. Sam's was near zero. The science was clear, but it described a different planet from the one Sam farmed on. He drove to the local co-op the next week, the lab report in his hand. He found Mitch Dawson in the back, joking with a group of farmers about soybean prices. Mitch was in his element. Mid-40s, sharp polo, the kind of man who remembered your kid's name and your acreage. "Need to talk, Mitch, about my program for next season." "Sam, just working on it. Gonna be a beast of a year. Prices are up, let's push yields. I'm thinking we bump your nitrogen rate another 20%. Go for the record." Sam put the lab report on the counter. "I'm thinking we change the program, radically." Mitch scanned the paper, his smile fatting. He pushed it back. "Look, Sam, every soil test says add more. That's their job. This microbial activity stuff is for lettuce growers in California. You grow corn and beans in Heartland. This is what works." He tapped a display bag of Acre Grow's premium blend. "This is what paid for your kid's college." "That's the problem," Sam said. "It only works until it doesn't, and it's stopping. My soil is turning to powder." Mitch leaned in, lowering his voice. "I get it, you're stressed. It's a tough business, but walking away from proven science, that's how you lose the farm, Sam. Not in 10 years, next year. Your yields will crater. You'll have weeds you can't imagine. It'll be a carnival of failure, and I'll have to be the guy who sells you the rescue package at double the cost. Don't do this." Sam left without ordering. That night he told his wife, Marie. They sat at the same kitchen table. "Leo says it'll take 3 to 5 years to transition. Yields will drop at first, maybe by a third. We'll have to learn everything from scratch." Marie looked at the Acre Grow bill, $84,000. "What's the alternative?" "Another bill like this next year, and the year after, until the land has nothing left to give or we have nothing left to borrow." She was quiet for a full minute. "What did your dad always say? Feed the soil, not the plant." He stopped saying it when the magic dust showed up. Sam spent the next month in a deep dive. He learned about compost teas, fungal inoculants, cover crop cocktails. He found a nearby dairy with a mountain of aging manure. He read about a farmer in Nebraska who hadn't bought fertilizer in 8 years and was winning yield contests. The knowledge was out there, but it was a mosaic, not a manual. He'd have to become the scientist. In January, he presented Marie with a spreadsheet. Column A was the conventional path: the Acre Grow bill, seed treatment costs, pesticide passes. A total input cost of $178,000 for the season, assuming stable prices. Column B was the transition budget: $40,000 for a used spreader to handle compost, $20,000 for cover crop seed and a no-till drill rental, $15,000 for biological amendments, mycorrhizal fungi, bacteria cultures, $0 for synthetic fertilizer. The projected income in column B was 60% of column A, a deficit of over $90,000 the first year. They had $80,000 in operating savings. It would wipe them out. "We cash in the CDs," Marie said. "The ones from my mom, that's another $50,000. "That's our safety net," Sam replied. "What's safer? Betting on a system that's already failed this land, or betting on the land itself?" On February 3rd, Sam called Mitch Dawson. "I'm canceling my Acre Grow contract for the season. All of it." The silence on the line was thick. "Sam, be reasonable. Let's do a half rate, a compromise." "No compromise, I'm out." Mitch's voice turned cold, professional. "I have to advise you that ceasing fertilization will violate the terms of your yield insurance. Your premium was based on a managed fertility program, and the co-op financing for your seed, that's tied to Acre Grow product use. You pull this and you're not just farming differently, you're farming alone." Sam hung up. He was now officially a heretic, and heretics, as Mitch Dawson would soon demonstrate, are best dealt with publicly. Let me tell you about the Heartland County Fair, because that's where a business disagreement became a war. The fair was the heart of the county's social and agricultural life. The grandstand speaker slot was reserved for local leaders, and somehow, Mitch Dawson had secured it for a talk titled "The Science of Feeding America." Sam and Marie went, as they always did. They were sitting in the third row when Mitch took the microphone. He spoke for 10 minutes about global population, yield gaps, and the noble role of modern agronomy. Then he paused, looked out at the crowd, and his eyes landed on Sam. "We have new challenges," Mitch said, his voice dripping with concern. "There are voices now, even among us, who would turn back the clock, who reject the very science that saved this county from hunger. They peddle romantic notions. They talk of dirt and worms as if we're gardening, not feeding nations." He pointed directly at Sam. "That man right there, Sam Riggs, is betting your dinner on dirt and worm poop. He's risking not just his farm, but the productivity of our community on a fantasy." 300 people turned to look. The laughter started as a ripple, then grew. Sam felt his face burn. Marie gripped his hand. Mitch smiled, a generous, pitying smile. "We need to support our farmers, folks, even the confused ones. Because when his experiment fails, as it will, it'll be all of us who help pick up the pieces." Sam stood up. He didn't say a word. He just walked out, the echo of laughter chasing him through the fairgrounds. He drove home, not to his house, but to his fields. He stood on the edge of a barren stretch that would be planted in corn in 6 weeks. The soil was pale, compacted. He knelt down, grabbed a handful, and let it sift through his fingers. It felt like nothing. This was what $84,000 a year bought. This was what a lifetime of loyalty to the blue bags had built. And this was what a man would be publicly ridiculed for trying to heal. He made a decision in that field as the sun went down. He wouldn't just transition his farm. He would document every step, every failure, every cost. He would measure it against the conventional fields around him. And in 3 years, he would stand in front of the same grandstand with numbers that no one could laugh at. But first, he had to face the immediate, practical consequence of Mitch Dawson's warning. The letter from his bank arrived 3 days after the fair. It was brief, and it contained a clause Sam had never properly read. The clause was in the operating note he'd signed with Heartland Community Bank 5 years earlier. Page 4, paragraph 2. Borrower agrees to maintain generally accepted agricultural practices, GAAP, on all pledged acreage as defined by local extension service guidelines. It was the generally accepted that was the trapdoor. Mitch Dawson was on the county extension board. The definition was whatever he and his friends said it was. The bank's letter was polite but firm. It stated that discontinuing a synthetic fertility program, as advised by the county extension, could be viewed as a failure to maintain GAAP, which in turn could be considered imprudent management, jeopardizing the collateral. They requested a meeting. Sam's $80,000 in savings was now a runway over a canyon. He had to spend it to prove his method wasn't insane, while the institution that held his debt was being told it was. He met with the loan officer, a man named David Klein, who had inherited the Riggs account. "Sam, we're not the enemy," David said, spreading his hands. "But our examiners look at risk. If the extension service says what you're doing is unconventional to the point of being reckless, we have to note it. It changes the risk profile of your loan." "Reckless is continuing to pour salt on a wound and calling it medicine," Sam said. He slid a new soil test across the desk, taken after his first application of compost. The organic matter ticked up by 0.05%. "The medicine is working, just slowly." David glanced at the numbers. 0.05. "Sam, that's a rounding error. What's your yield projection for this year?" 60% of my 5-year average." David leaned back. "A 40% drop. That's not a risk profile, Sam. That's a default scenario. The bank can't ignore that." The meeting ended with a directive. Sam had to provide quarterly yield verification and soil tests. The bank would monitor the situation. It was a sword over his head, held by a thread of patience. Let me tell you about that first spring, because it was a carnival of failure, just as Mitch had promised. Sam spread 200 tons of dairy compost. It smelled for weeks. His neighbors downwind called to complain. The cover crop seed he planted, a mix of rye, clover, and vetch, was eaten by birds and rabbits before it could establish. He replanted, and a late frost killed half of it. He brewed his first compost tea in a homemade contraption of barrels and aquarium pumps. It clogged, overflowed, and flooded his equipment shed with a brown, stinky soup. Marie found him at 2 in the morning, sitting on the wet floor, head in his hands. The conventional fields around him were a textbook of green efficiency. His were a patchwork of struggling plants and bare dirt. By June, the difference was stark. Driving past the Riggs farm was a local pastime. "How's the dirt farmer doing?" they'd ask at the diner. The answer was always a joke. But in one field, the North 40, the cover crop had taken. The rye was knee-high, the clover spreading. Sam walked it every evening. The soil underneath was cooler, softer. He dug up a handful. It held together. It smelled like earth, not dust. He found earthworms. He hadn't seen an earthworm in a field in a decade. He called Leo Chen. "I have worms." "Congratulations, Papa," Leo said. "That's your deposit. The bank is open." Sam's corn in that field was shorter, paler than his neighbor's, but it was alive. The rest of his corn was stunted, yellowing. He applied a foliar spray of diluted fish emulsion and kelp. It smelled like low tide. The next day, Mitch Dawson drove by, slowed his truck, and took a picture. By afternoon, the picture was circulating with the caption, "Riggs's new perfume, selling by the bottle soon." The isolation was total. Then in July, he got a visit from an unexpected ally. Ben Carter farmed 3,000 acres 2 counties over. He was in his 60s, a legend for his yields. He pulled up in a dusty truck, no warning. "Heard you're the crazy one," Ben said, "not getting out. Show me." Sam showed him the North 40. Ben walked into the corn, felt the stalks, dug at the roots. He said nothing for 10 minutes. Then he pointed at the neighboring field, a lush, dark green sea of corn belonging to a Dawson client. "See how dark that green is? That's nitrogen saturation. The plant's gorging. It'll be weak-stalked, fall over in a storm. Yours is hungry. It's rooting deeper, looking for food. That's good." Ben turned to Sam. "I did what you're doing 20 years ago. Switched 200 acres as a test. Yield dropped 40% year 1, 30% year 2. By year 4, it matched. By year 6, it beat my conventional ground by 10%, and my input cost was 60% less." "Why'd you stop?" Sam asked. Ben looked away. "The co-op cut my credit line. The bank threatened to call my loans. My father said I was embarrassing the family. I caved. I plowed it under and went back to the program." He kicked at the soil. "Biggest regret of my life. Not because of the money, because I knew it worked and I let them tell me it didn't." Ben handed Sam a thumb drive. "My notes, everything I did right and wrong. You're not crazy, you're just early." He got back in his truck. "And you're alone, that's the hard part." The notes were a revelation. They were detailed, scientific, and full of failures. Ben had tracked everything. Sam realized his own haphazard approach was part of the problem. He needed data, not just hope. He turned his farm office into a lab. He bought a microscope. He started counting fungi strands in his soil. He tracked rainfall infiltration rates. He was no longer just a farmer. He was a researcher defending a thesis. The first harvest was a disaster, just as projected. His overall yield was 58% of his average. The income didn't cover his operating costs. He had to dip into the 50,000 from Marie's CDs. The skepticism in town hardened into certainty. Sam Riggs was a fool, and now he was a broke fool. But the data from the North 40 told a different story. The yield there was only 20% lower than his average, not 40. And the moisture content of the grain was lower, meaning he saved on drying costs. The soil test showed organic matter had increased by 0.3% in that field. In one season, it was working in one isolated place. That winter, Mitch Dawson made his move. He proposed a resolution to the County Extension Board to formally define generally accepted agricultural practices, to include a balanced synthetic fertility program for row crop production. The vote was scheduled for January. If it passed, Sam's bank would have all the justification it needed to declare him in default. Sam attended the meeting. He brought his soil tests, his yield maps from the North 40, Ben Carter's notes. He was given 3 minutes to speak. He talked about water retention, microbial biomass, input cost savings. He was met with silent stares. Mitch spoke after him. He didn't mention Sam. He talked about food security, about the risk of experimenting with the food supply, about the need for proven, reliable methods. He cited Agri-grown-funded university studies showing the yield gap of organic systems. The vote was unanimous. The resolution passed. Sam walked out into the freezing night. He had lost. The institution had formally declared his method illegitimate. His phone buzzed, a text from David Klein at the bank. "We need to meet tomorrow, 10 a.m. Please bring your current financials." This was no longer about agronomy. It was about survival. The bank was going to call his loan. He had $90,000 left. He needed a miracle, or he needed to prove his entire farm could perform like the North 40, and he needed to do it in one growing season. He drove home and went straight to his office. He opened Ben Carter's notes to a section he'd glossed over before. It was titled "The Catalyst." Ben had written that in his third year, he'd applied a specific blend of mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria at planting, alongside a mineral-based amendment called rock phosphate. The combination had triggered a quantum leap in soil function. Sam had the fungi. He didn't have the rock phosphate, and it was too late to order, but he knew a man who did. At 5 the next morning, before his bank meeting, Sam drove to Ben Carter's farm. He pounded on the farmhouse door. Ben answered, bleary-eyed. "I need rock phosphate, enough for 800 acres, today." Ben squinted at him. "You read the notes. The bank is calling my loan today. I have one season to prove this works on scale, or I lose everything. The North 40 worked. I need the whole farm to be the North 40. Ben was silent for a long moment. "I have a hopper bin full of it, left over from when I quit. It's just sitting there." He rubbed his face. "I'll sell it to you at cost, but Sam, even with it, it's a Hail Mary. The biology takes time to build." "I don't have time. I have one shot." Ben nodded. "Then let's load your truck." Sam arrived at the bank meeting an hour late, smelling of dust and phosphate. David Klein and the bank president, a woman named Susan Greer, were waiting. Susan got straight to the point. "Sam, based on the Extension Board's new guidelines, your farming practices no longer meet the standard required by your loan covenant. We're giving you the opportunity to rectify it. Resume a conventional fertility program with Acre Grow this spring, and we'll restructure the loan." Sam placed a bag of soil from the North 40 on the conference table. Then he placed a bag of soil from a conventional field he'd sampled down the road. "You can see the difference. You can feel it. One is alive. One is dead. I'm not going back to making dead soil." Susan's expression was impassive. "Then we have no choice but to declare you in default and begin foreclosure proceedings. You have 60 days to pay the loan in full, or we seize the collateral." The amount was $320,000. Sam didn't flinch. "I'll have it for you in 90 days. Susan almost smiled. "How?" "Because in 90 days, I'll have harvested the first crop grown on my new soil. And you're going to want to see the numbers before you take possession of the most valuable farmland in this county." He stood up. "But I need something from you first. A 60-day extension on the 60-day notice. Give me until October 1st. If my yield doesn't beat the county average, I'll sign the deed over to you voluntarily. No foreclosure, no legal fees for you. If it does beat the average, you renew my loan on the original terms and strike that GAAP clause from the contract." Susan and David exchanged a look. It was a wild proposal. The county average was 200 bushels per acre. Sam's yield the previous year was 116. Even with a miracle, beating 200 was impossible. "You're asking us to bet on an impossibility," Susan said. "No, I'm asking you to bet on your own collateral. You want this land. It'll be worth more if I'm right. You lose nothing but a little time. What do you have to lose?" Susan studied him. "You have until October 1st. One day later and we file. And Sam, I hope you're right for your family's sake." Sam left the bank. He had just bought 120 days, one growing season to do the impossible. He had the rock phosphate. He had the microbes. He had a plan. And he had one brutal, inescapable problem he hadn't accounted for. Mitch Dawson owned the only custom planting and harvesting operation within 50 miles. And 2 days after Sam's bank meeting, Every single one of his machines was suddenly booked solid for the entire planting season. It was a perfect blockade. No planter, no crop. No crop, no yield. No yield, no farm. Sam stood in his empty machine shed looking at his aging, inadequate equipment. The planter he had was a 6-row from the 90s. To plant 800 acres with it before the optimal window closed would take over 3 weeks. He had 5 days of good weather forecast. Mitch hadn't just booked his services, he'd calculated the logistics of failure. Sam called every custom operator in a 100-mile radius. The answer was the same: booked solid or suddenly unavailable when they heard it was for Sam rigs. Mitch's network was deep. The message was clear: step out of line and the infrastructure you depend on disappears. Marie found him that evening staring at a wall map of the farm. "We'll use our planter," she said. "We'll plant around the clock." "With what, Marie? It'll take forever. The weather will break. The soil will be too cold or too wet by the time we finish. The yield loss from late planting is a killer. It's over." She put a hand on his shoulder. "Then we ask for help." "Who?" "Everyone who has equipment is either scared of Mitch or agrees with him." "Not everyone," she said. She drove to town the next morning. She didn't go to the co-op or the diner. She went to the Heartland County Historical Society, a small building next to the library. Inside, she found Elmer Fitch, 82 years old, president of the society and former owner of Fitch Implement, which he'd sold to a chain 20 years prior. Elmer remembered Henry Riggs. "Your father-in-law bought his first real tractor from me," Elmer said, sipping coffee. "1957 John Deere 420, good machine." Marie told him the story: the soil, the bill, the fare, the bank, and now the planting blockade. Elmer listened without expression. When she finished, he set his cup down. "Mitch Dawson's father was a salesman for me, good talker, not much for getting his hands dirty. The apple didn't fall far." He stood up a little stiff. "Come with me." He led her out back to a long, metal-clad building behind the society. He unlocked a padlock and swung the doors open. Inside, under tarps, were 2 vintage tractors and a piece of equipment Marie didn't recognize. "This," Elmer said, pulling a tarp off, "is a John Deere 495 no-till drill. 12 rows, bought it in the 80s to experiment with. Works like a dream. Never sold it." He patted it like a favorite dog. "It's set up for planting into cover crop residue, exactly what your husband needs. And those 2 tractors out front have the horsepower to pull it." Marie was speechless. "Elmer, we can't afford to rent this, and we have no way to." "Who said anything about rent?" Elmer interrupted. "I'm not renting it, I'm loaning it, on one condition. You let me come out and watch. I want to see if the old ways mixed with some new ideas can actually beat the blue bags. I've been waiting 30 years to see someone try." Word spread faster than blight. By that afternoon, 3 other farmers showed up at Sam's place. They were older, semi-retired, farming a few hundred acres each. They weren't part of Mitch's inner circle. They were men who remembered when farming wasn't a balance sheet, when the health of the land was something you could feel. One brought a fuel tanker truck to keep the tractors running. Another brought his grandson to help run a grain cart. A third, a man named Joe whose farm had been foreclosed on in the 80s, simply said, "I drove tractor for 50 years. Point me at a field." On April 18th, a convoy of antique equipment rolled onto the Riggs farm. It looked like a museum exhibit come to life. Sam had prepared the fields. He'd mowed the cover crops, leaving a thick mat of residue. He'd injected his biological brew, the mycorrhizae, the bacteria, the rock phosphate, into the soil using a modified sprayer. For 96 hours straight, they planted. 2 tractors, 2 drivers per tractor, switching off in 4-hour shifts. Marie and a rotation of neighbors' wives kept them fed. Elmer Fitch sat in a lawn chair at the field's edge, watching the old drill do its work. On the 3rd day, Mitch Dawson drove by. He slowed his truck to a crawl, watching the parade of old men and old iron planting Sam's heresy. He didn't stop. He didn't say a word. The picture he took this time didn't get posted online. They finished the last acre as the sun set on the 5th day. The planting window was closed. They'd done it. Sam stood in the field, exhausted, surrounded by men he barely knew, and felt something he hadn't in a year: momentum. But momentum is fragile. 2 weeks later, a late frost hit. Temperatures dropped to 28 degrees. Sam's newly emerged corn seedlings, tender and green, were exposed. Conventional fields pumped with soluble nitrogen were darker, tougher, and better able to withstand the shock. The next morning, the county was a checkerboard of frost damage. Sam's fields looked like they'd been sprayed with a blowtorch. The leaves were curled, white, dying. Leo Chen told him over the phone, "It's a setback, Sam, but the plants with the deepest roots will recover. The question is, do yours have roots yet?" They dug up plants. In the conventional fields, the roots were shallow, a dense mat feeding off the easy nitrogen at the surface. In Sam's fields, the roots were longer, thinner, reaching down into the cold earth, searching. They were stressed, but they were alive. The biology in the soil was producing exudates that acted like antifreeze. It was a theory, a hope. Over the next week, the conventional corn recovered quickly, surging back with its chemical fuel. Sam's corn struggled. It was visibly behind. The gap was wider than ever. The laughter returned, quieter now, tinged with pity. "Riggs's experiment got frosted," they said. "Mother Nature voted." Sam's data told a more nuanced story. His soil temperature was more stable. Moisture retention was higher. But none of that mattered if the corn didn't grow. He applied another round of compost tea, a foliar feed of sea minerals. The progress was agonizingly slow. In June, the first real test came. A windstorm, straight-line winds of 60 miles per hour, ripped through the county. It lasted 20 minutes. The next morning, the damage was apocalyptic in places. Whole fields of tall, lush corn were flattened. The stalks snapped or leaning at 45 degrees, the classic lodging caused by weak stalks from too much nitrogen. Sam and Marie drove their perimeter, hearts in their throats. Their corn was shorter. It bent in the wind, whipping back and forth. But when the wind died, it stood back up. Not all of it, but 90% of it. The stalks were thinner, tougher, more flexible. The root systems held. The field that had looked so pathetic in May had just survived a test that decimated its neighbors. They weren't the only ones to notice. A local crop insurance adjuster, walking a flattened field next to Sam's, saw the difference. He took pictures. Those pictures made their way to the extension office. For the first time, there was visual, undeniable evidence that Sam's method had a tangible, practical benefit: resilience. But resilience doesn't pay the bank. Yield does. By late July, the conventional corn was towering dark green, already in the reproductive stage. Sam's corn was finally catching up, a lighter, healthier green, but still a full foot shorter on average. The yield monitors on passing combines, using satellite data, were already generating preseason estimates. The estimates for Sam's farm were publicly accessible on a farmer data-sharing platform. They projected 170 bushels per acre. The county average projection was 210. He was 40 bushels short. Sam knew the public estimates were crude, based on plant height and canopy cover. They couldn't measure kernel depth or stalk strength, but they were the numbers the world saw. They were the numbers David Klein at the bank saw. In August, the drought hit. 3 weeks with no rain, temperatures in the 90s. The conventional fields with their shallow roots began to stress almost immediately. Irrigation systems ran nonstop, pumping aquifers and running up electricity bills. Sam's fields with higher organic matter held the moisture longer. His plants showed stress signs days later. When they did, the leaves curled tighter, a more efficient water conservation method. The difference in daily water use was measurable. He was pumping half as much water as his neighbors to achieve the same plant health. The drought did one more thing. It revealed pest pressure. The conventional fields stressed by the drought became targets for aphids and mites. Sprayer rigs were constantly in the fields, applying insecticides. Sam's fields had a visible population of ladybugs and lacewings. The beneficial insects, fostered by the diverse cover crops and absence of broad-spectrum chemicals, were controlling the pests for free. He didn't make a single insecticide pass all summer. The evidence was building, but it was silent, biological, hidden in the soil and the insect life. The public metric was still plant height, and Sam's corn was still shorter. Then in early September, the paradigm shifted. It started with a single email from Leo Chen with the subject line, "Look at this." Attached was a thermal image of Hartland County taken by a research satellite. It showed heat signatures. The conventional fields glowed bright white and red. They were hotter, stressed, releasing more heat due to water evaporation and plant stress. Sam's fields showed up as swaths of blue and green, cooler, more stable. The image was scientific, impartial, and devastating to the narrative of failure. Leo had shared it with a few colleagues. One of them shared it on a professional agronomy forum. Within 48 hours, Sam's farm had a new nickname in certain online circles, the Oasis. The story was no longer a local feud. It was a case study. Researchers from the state university emailed, asking for permission to take plant and soil samples. A documentary filmmaker from the coast called, wanting to visit. Mitch Dawson saw the thermal image. He understood its power immediately. Data was one thing. A picture from space that anyone could understand was another. He couldn't fight a satellite, so he changed tactics. He began telling people at the co-op that the thermal image just proved Riggs's crops were underdeveloped. Cooler because they're not growing, not because they're healthy, he'd say. A corpse is cool too. The public narrative was now split. The old guard saw a failing crop. A new, tech-savvy audience saw a revolution. The harvest would be the jury. On September 20th, Sam began his yield checks. He used a manual combine chute, weighing samples from random spots in each field. The numbers from the first field, the North 40 from the previous year, made his hands shake. He did the math twice. 218 bushels per acre. He texted Marie, North 40, 218. The next field, 205. The next, 195. He worked his way across the farm. The numbers climbed as he reached fields that had been in transition for only this season. The lowest was 180. The farm average, calculated that night, was 198 bushels per acre. It was just below the county average projection of 210, but the county average would drop. The lodged corn from the windstorm, the drought-stressed fields, the pest damage, all of that would pull the conventional yields down. Sam's yields were stable, uniform. He knew it. He also knew it would be close. Too close for the bank to accept as a clear victory. He needed one field, just one, to blow the doors off. He saved his best field for last. The one where he'd applied the most compost, the most diverse cover crop mix, and the full cocktail of biologicals. He took the sample on September 28th. The corn was dense, the kernels deep. He weighed it, calculated the moisture, and ran the yield formula. The number was 234 bushels per acre. He sat down in the cab of his truck, the number written on a notepad on his knee, 234. It wasn't just a good yield. It was a championship yield, the kind that wins plaques at the state fair. And it was achieved with no synthetic fertilizer, no insecticides, and half the water. He had the data, he had the satellite image, he had the yield. He had 90 days to pay the bank, and he now had a crop that could do it. The harvest began on October 1st, the deadline day. The bank would be watching. The county would be watching. Mitch Dawson would be watching. Sam climbed into the combine cab at dawn. The header lowered, and the first rows of corn, the corn grown on dirt and worm poop, fed into the machine. The yield monitor screen flickered to life. It would display a real-time bushel per acre readout for the whole world to see. This was no longer an experiment. It was an audit. And in the distance, parked at the edge of the field, Sam could see two trucks. One was David Klein's from the bank. The other was Mitch Dawson's. The yield monitor's display glowed green in the dim cab. The first pass wasn't an average, it was a snapshot. The number flashed, 227. Sam didn't react. He kept the combine steady, the header swallowing 12 rows at a time. He could see David Klein standing outside his truck, arms crossed. Mitch Dawson remained in his driver's seat, window up. The real-time data was transmitting to a cloud server. There would be no dispute over the numbers. By the time he finished the first 10-acre check, the field average was 221 bushels per acre. He texted the screen capture to Marie, then to David Klein's phone. He saw David look down at his phone, then back at the combine. His posture changed. He uncrossed his arms. Sam worked through the morning. The yields were consistent, 218, 215, 224. The field where he'd gotten the 234 sample hit 231. The monitor didn't lie. The grain tank filled with plump, uniform kernels. The quality was there. At noon, David Klein walked across the stubble to the edge of the field where Sam had stopped to unload into a grain cart. Joe, the retired farmer, was driving the cart. He gave David a slow nod. "These numbers are real time?" David asked, his banker's mask back in place. "They're what the machine is weighing as it goes," Sam said, wiping grease from his hands. "The final tally will be at the elevator, but yeah, they're real." David looked out over the harvested swath, then at the standing corn ahead. "The county average is going to come in around 195. The windstorm and drought hit the conventional ground hard. Your projection is 210. "At least," Sam said, "probably a bit higher." David was silent for a long moment, doing mental math. Input cost for Sam was roughly 60% less than conventional. Yield was at least equal, likely higher. Profit per acre was not close. It was a rout. "I'll need the elevator tickets as soon as you have them," David said. "The loan committee meets Thursday." "What about the GAAP clause, the extension board's definition?" David almost smiled. "I think the committee will agree that yields exceeding the county average constitute an acceptable agricultural practice, regardless of the color of the bag it came from." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Sam, I'm glad you were right." Mitch Dawson's truck was gone by then. He didn't wait for the final numbers. He'd seen enough. The official weigh-in at the Heartland Grain Co-op was a quiet affair. Sam delivered load after load. The moisture was low, the test weight high. The final farm average, certified by the elevator manager, was 212 bushels per acre. The official county average, released the following week, was 194. Sam had beaten it by 18 bushels. On cost alone, he had made more net profit per acre than any farm in the county, including the 5,000-acre operations. The bank renewed his loan for 10 years. They removed the GAAP clause. They offered him a lower interest rate. But the real victory wasn't on paper. It was in the silence that followed. The jokes at the diner stopped. The pointed looks at the co-op ceased. When Sam walked in to buy cover crop seed for the next year, the conversation around him didn't hush. It just continued as if he'd always been there. That was the acknowledgement. He was no longer a heretic. He was a farmer with results. Let me tell you about the winter meeting, because that's where the story completes its arc. Every January, the Heartland County Extension held an annual crop review meeting. It was usually a technical affair, charts about hybrid performance, fertilizer timing. Mitch Dawson had spoken for the last decade. This year, the organizer called Sam. "We'd like you to present your system, just the data, 15 minutes. Sam prepared for a hostile crowd. He brought slides, yield maps, soil organic matter graphs, water usage charts, input cost comparisons. When he and Marie walked into the community center, the room was packed. Every chair was taken. Farmers stood along the walls. He saw Ben Carter in the back, gave him a nod. He saw Elmer Fitch up front. Mitch Dawson was there, sitting in the third row. He was alone. Sam didn't talk about philosophy or rebellion. He talked numbers. He showed a side-by-side. His input cost per acre was $208. The county average was 476. His yield was 212 bushels. The average was 194. His net profit per acre after all expenses was $390. The county average was 105. A hand went up in the back. A young farmer Sam didn't know. What about year one, the 40% drop? How do you survive that? You don't, Sam said honestly. Not alone. You need a bridge, a line of credit that isn't tied to your fertilizer salesman. You need to start small on a field, not the whole farm. I did it the hard way because I didn't know any other way. Don't do that. Transition 100 acres. Prove it to yourself and your banker first. Another question. The biology stuff, the teas, the fungi, isn't that just voodoo? How do you know it's working? Sam clicked to a new slide. It showed microscope images. One was dead, inert soil. The next was teeming with fungal hyphae like a miniature forest. You measure it, he said. You test. This isn't faith, it's agronomy, a different kind. The questions went on for 40 minutes past his allotted time. They were technical, serious. No one laughed. When the meeting ended, a line of farmers formed to talk to him. They asked about compost sources, cover crop mixes, where to buy mycorrhizal inoculant. Sam saw Mitch Dawson stand up and move toward the door. He excused himself and intercepted him near the exit. Mitch stopped. He looked tired. You got what you wanted, Sam. You proved your point. That was never the point, Sam said. The point was to keep my farm alive, and maybe learn something that could keep other farms alive too. Mitch's polished demeanor was gone. My sales are down 20% this quarter. Farmers are asking for smaller orders. They're experimenting, they say. You know what happens if that trend continues? My branch closes. I have a family too. Sam hadn't considered that. His rebellion had a casualty. You could sell the biology, Sam said. The compost, the inoculants. The margin's probably better than on bulk nitrogen. Mitch gave a short, bitter laugh. And tell my bosses what? That everything we've sold for 40 years is the wrong product. They'd fire me before I finished the sentence. He looked at Sam, and for a second the old animosity flickered. Then it died. You were right. I was wrong. It happens. I just never thought it would happen to me. He walked out. Sam watched him go. The victory felt hollow for a moment, shaded with the cost to another man's livelihood. But Mitch had chosen his side. He had weaponized his position. The consequences were his to bear. Let me tell you about the final piece of data, because it arrived in March, long after the harvest was forgotten. It was the soil test results from the samples taken after harvest. Sam's farm had averaged an increase in soil organic matter of 0.8% in a single year. The conventional fields tested around him showed no change or a decline. 0.8%. That meant each acre of his land could now hold 16,000 more gallons of water than it could the year before. The biology tests showed microbial biomass had increased by over 150%. The soil was no longer dirt. It was a living system. He framed the soil test and hung it in his office next to the first, damning test from 3 years earlier. The contrast was the real trophy. Now let me tell you about what happened next, because success copies itself. 4 farmers in Hartland County transitioned a portion of their acreage to biological methods the following spring. They formed an informal co-op to buy compost in bulk. Ben Carter came out of retirement to consult for them. Elmer Fitch's old no-till drill was in constant demand. Sam's son, Jake, a freshman in college studying environmental science, changed his major to sustainable ag. He told his dad, "I used to think you were just being stubborn. Now I think you're the only one who was paying attention." The documentary filmmaker came and went. The film, when it was released, didn't change the world, but it was watched 20,000 times on YouTube, mostly by farmers. The most important conversation happened in Sam's kitchen, the same place it had all begun. Marie laid the bank statement on the table. The operating loan was paid off. The line of credit was untouched. They had $60,000 in savings again, not from a one-time crop, but from 3 years of radically lower expenses. "We're free," she said. Sam looked at the statement. The number was less important than the absence of another number, the Acre bill. It would never come again. He walked out to the North 40, now just stubble and cover crop. The soil was dark, crumbly. He knelt down as he had 3 years earlier and picked up a handful. It was cool and moist. It held together. It was full of life. This was what he had bought. Not with money, but with stubbornness, with data, with the help of old men and old machines, and with a belief that the land could heal if you stopped poisoning it. The fertilizer salesman had laughed, the bank had threatened, the community had doubted. And now, the soil itself was the vindication. The system wasn't perfect. It required more management, more observation. You had to be a biologist and an ecologist, not just a chemist, but it was resilient. It was profitable, and it was his. He stood up, dusted off his hands, and looked across the field to where his neighbor's conventional corn would be planted in a few weeks. It would be a gamble on weather, on markets, on the price of synthetic nitrogen. Sam's gamble was different. His gamble was on life itself. And for the first time in a long time, the odds were in his favor. Sam Riggs's story isn't unique. It's a pattern. An individual sees a crack in the system, a flaw in the foundational logic. They point it out, and the system doesn't argue, it laughs. It dismisses. It uses every lever of finance, social pressure, and institutional authority to prove the individual wrong. Until the moment the system can't, because the data arrives, and the laughter dies in their throat. For 50 years, American agriculture bet everything on chemistry. Yield was God, and synthetic fertilizer was its profit. It worked until the costs, both on the balance sheet and in the soil, started compounding. The system became a trap. Farmers were borrowing money to buy products to grow crops to sell to pay back the money they borrowed, with less left over each cycle. The land was the casualty, turning from a resilient ecosystem into a sterile substrate, dependent on constant, expensive injections. Sam's rebellion was against that trap. He wasn't fighting a person. He was fighting a paradigm. The fertilizer salesman was just the most visible priest of that paradigm. The real antagonists were the assumptions buried so deep we stopped seeing them as choices. The assumption that feeding the plant is the same as feeding the soil. The assumption that higher input costs are an inevitable tax on progress. The assumption that a system that degrades its own foundation can last. His victory wasn't just a yield number. It was a proof of concept. It proved that biology, managed with rigor and patience, can outcompete chemistry on its own terms. Profit. It proved that soil health isn't a luxury for hobbyists. It's the fundamental capital of the farm. And it proved that the most dangerous phrase in any industry is, "This is how everyone does it." So let me ask you the final question, and it doesn't matter if you farm 1,000 acres or a backyard garden. What are you not questioning because everyone around you accepts it? What clause have you not read in the contract of your own life or work because you trust the person who wrote it? What expense do you treat as inevitable that might, in fact, be optional? The systems we live in, agricultural, financial, social, are built on inherited logic. That logic has a shelf life. Sam Riggs reached the expiration date on his. He looked at the dead soil and the $84,000 bill and realized the deal was no longer working. So he renegotiated, not with the bank at first, but with the land itself. He offered a different agreement: life instead of depletion, complexity instead of simplicity, observation instead of prescription. And the land, it turned out, was willing to deal. The old guard will always mock the new logic. They have to. Their identity, their expertise, their revenue is tied to the old one. But the future doesn't argue with the past. It just presents a better result and waits. Sam's field is quiet now. Next year's cover crop is already growing, building carbon, housing microbes, preparing for another season. The system is self-reinforcing. It gets better with time, not worse. The input bill is a memory. The laughter is an echo. And the soil, the once dead soil, is awake. If you found a crack in your own system today, would you have the patience to follow it? Would you tolerate the laughter for 3 seasons to find out what's on the other side? Thanks for watching. If you want more stories of individuals who redrew the map while everyone else was following the old directions, make sure to subscribe.